Welcome back to the Rogersarnt podcast where we talk all things Army. And I am your host, Sarn Cruz. As always, I don't want to waste you guys' time, so let's get started.
Rogersarnt!
Today we're going to answer the infamous question of, is the Army basic training getting soft? Now, I was watching a video on YouTube. Actually, I was scrolling through the YouTube and got stuck in the wormhole, and I found a couple videos. One was they were in the 80s. They were recorded in the 80s, and one was in Fort Leonard, Missouri. And I got that video off of, I think his name was Super Soldier Chris, off of YouTube. And then the next one was at Fort Benning, Georgia. And this one I saw it from Bradford Beckett. And I just wanted to just share my thoughts on this and kind of like compare the 80s version of basic training to the one that I went to, and ultimately the one that we're doing now in Fort Benning, Georgia, which is under a new program. They call it the, they call it the 100 yards of boot camp on day one. So let's start off by just talking about like what people, from what I hear, the majority of individuals, when they talk about basic training getting soft, they mainly talk about drill sergeants not yelling, drill sergeant not cursing, not being able to smoke soldiers, and which leads into the infamous shark attack, right? So just to give a quick backstory about the shark attacks from everything that I've watched and read, it was that they were prevalent at that time because a lot of soldiers were being drafted or being and recruited. They were pretty much, a lot of them were avoiding prison, or a lot of the drafts, what the drill sergeants needed to do was for the ones avoiding the prison sentences. Because I even know a few of individuals that are still in the Army now that they'll tell you the story that, yeah, it was either this or go to jail, right? So those of the ones that were going to jail or avoiding jail, they had to, the drill sergeants I speak of, had to kind of like, I guess they asserted their dominance over them, right? Just to make sure that they understood who was the boss. Just imagine like the thought process of an individual that was probably, it was either them staying in prison or going to the Army, like the thought process. So the drill sergeants were privy to that, and they just made sure that they knew that they knew who's boss. And on the other side of the spectrum, which were the individuals that were just drafted or that they enlisted, obviously basic training is to weed out the weak at the end of the day. That's why a lot of recruits don't make it through basic training. They won't make it to AIT because they realize this is not for me, you know? And then I think that just kind of turned into like a rite of passage, because I know when I went, and I enlisted in the Army in 2007, and those shark attacks, we knew about them and we knew they were coming. So I think it just went from having to do it to this is how we've always done it, you know? And that's going to be another subject, this is how we've always done it mentality, but I digress. So in Fort Leonard Wood, from what I saw in the video, they spoke about that the basic training itself was 8 weeks long, which was normal. There was no shark attack at all. Now, this is in the 80s. Now, to be fair, many of the things the bullets that I'm going to point out are maybe they just weren't recorded. But there were a lot of other things recorded, but I just didn't notice any shark attacks actually. And one of the most things that I saw was like the recruits, they were welcomed by the post commander. Like they all sat in a classroom on their first day and they got the in brief from the post commander, which I find that kind of baffling, because to be honest with you, in today's day and age, we can't get the post commander anywhere, you know, like his schedule. Yeah, it's a he at this time. His schedule is so tight that, you know, in order for that individual to be coming to even a graduation for basic leaders course, which we hold here on Fort Hood, would be an act of Congress. So that was kind of surprising to me that they actually got the post commander to get them in briefed. Another thing I didn't notice, because I am a medic, so I started looking at all the medical portions to see if they done anything medically. And when we came in 2007, we also knew about the infamous peanut butter shot. And I didn't see that there. I remember when we came in and we got that peanut butter shot, that shot in our right butt cheek, which I remember. It was so cold, like they didn't even warm it up. It was so cold. It was so thick. It was so uncomfortable. And you would see half of the formation as they're waiting. They'd just sit there and we were all rolling like on our butts, kind of like trying to roll it out. Everyone just looked weird. But yeah, I didn't see none of that in Fort Leonard Wood. Another thing that I didn't see much of, if any of, was there was no real yelling at all from like the drill sergeants. And to be honest with you, the drill sergeants were very relaxed. Now, mind you, this was like a 20-minute video. So I'm pretty sure they probably cut a lot of stuff out. But I would imagine that in post production that they would be like, hey, do we want to include this? Do we not want to include this? Will this deter recruitment? I don't know. There was probably a lot of political stuff, but I'll tell you right now, there was no yelling. In fact, a lot of the times that the drill sergeants were talking to the new recruits, I didn't hear a yes drill sergeant, no drill sergeant. It was just a casual conversation. As time progressed into the cycle, you can see like drill sergeants, like they were kind of like they were actually being nice to troops. Like one drill sergeant, they showed he was asking troops, so where you from? So what's your family like component? Like how many people you have in your family, brothers, sisters, and stuff like that. Like they were like actually getting to know the soldier, which in my time was unheard of. The only time I had one-on-one with my drill sergeant was when I had to go to legal in order to do a power of attorney for my spouse at the time. I can't remember what she had to do. She had to, ship my car, maybe. I can't remember. So long ago. But that was the only time I had one-on-one. Other than that, there was no talking to the drill sergeant. It was yes, drill sergeant, no drill sergeant. Roger that, drill sergeant, let's go. Move out. So I found that interesting. I'm pretty sure they probably did it just for the production itself, kind of like to show that drill sergeants are human. But like I said, I still find it weird to see a drill sergeant just sitting there just chopping it up with a recruit. Another thing that I saw, which was the DFAC. These recruits had cheeseburgers, hot dogs, French fries, and cake. Man, I can tell you that was not a thing in 2007. I don't know if it's now. I'll in future podcasts I'll interview troops and ask them about their experiences when it comes to the menu in basic training. But I specifically remember, and I've stated this previously, we got our asses handed to us for one of our battle buddies eating cake, like on the spot as soon as we got out. Like they sniped them, they saw it, they watched him eat it, let him enjoy it. And we came out and they gave us the whole spiel and we got smoked right there on the spot. We didn't even move. We didn't even get our weapons, nothing. They were stacked and we just got smoked. So, yeah, that was really, really kind of like surprising to me that they had all those amenities. Another thing was what they did show about like physical training, the PT part. They did show that they were doing PT like in full uniform. Kind of like nowadays, the only time we'll do PT in full uniform is like if we're going to go on a ruck march, if we're doing combatives, or just like we're doing obstacle course or something like that. But typically we're in PTs. We had our sneakers and shorts, dependent on the weather. But these guys, they had full uniforms And I mean, they did have PT shoes, but still, I would venture to say that it would be a lot more tougher and uncomfortable to do PT in the morning in full uniform. No one wants to do that. Another thing that they did, which I also had, was church on Sundays, and I've previously stated that that's where you got your cookies and your juice, like all your sugars. They're always at church, so they did provide services for everyone. So that's been a constant, and I could put my hand on fire that they still provide that to today. Another thing is obviously they had the phone calls, the pay phones and stuff like that. We also had pay phones, and I'm pretty sure now in today's day and age, I don't think they even need pay phones because I think my brother, he went through basic training a few years ago, and he had his phone. So I think nowadays they have their cell phones and they can just use them as see fit. So that was you can see the progression from years, how it went from payphones to cell phones, and I'm pretty sure they can't use their cell phones whenever they want to, but they have access to them. My cell phone was in a duffel bag, locked up until the end of the cycle. I didn't see my cell phone, not even on the last day. Well, not even on the second to last day. We got it when we got all our stuff so we can start packing. And even then, I think I used my cell phone, and I was standing there, and I remember the troop commander, the battery commander, he was like, "Hey, watch out! Don't get too comfortable with your cell phone and whatnot." Kind of like in the Army you can't walk and talk, but I was just there. But yeah, another thing that I found super interesting, or my last two that I have for Fort Leonard Wood, they got passes while in basic training to go to the PX, the post exchange. I'm not sure if they do now. I have to check. I should have done my research on that. My apologies. But for sure, we did not have that. There was no such thing. When they had in reception before we got to actual basic training itself. This is where we got our PTs, our PT sneakers. That's the closest thing we came to anything. I don't remember. Never did we go to the actual PX itself. But yes, back in the 80s, they were able to go to the PX and ball out of control and do whatever they had to do. So I don't know. That was a shocker to me when they showed it. They also had, last but not least, they had access to the rec center. And in the rec center, they played ping pong. They had instruments. They played pool. And it also showed a bowling alley. So I think they had access to the bowling alley. So that was, I don't know if basic training was so strenuous at that time that they needed a way to decompress, but never did we have access to anything. When we got there, I was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. My little brother actually went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma as well. At my time, we were the last all male cycle. And then from there, like my brother, when I went to his graduation, there were females. It was co-ed. So never, I don't know. With us, it was just all business, no play. And if you played, you got smoked. So yeah, that's everything for Fort Leonard Wood from that video. And like I said, shout out to Super Soldier Chris for that video on YouTube. And now we're gonna move into Fort Benning. Now, to keep this for the sake of time, I did take some stuff out, which is they also were 8 weeks long. They also were in an area that like a classroom environment when they got their in brief. But I kind of just kept with the stuff that kind of like got me, that surprised me. So Fort Benning was also 8 weeks long. They surprisingly did not have a shark attack, which baffled my mind, home of the Follow Me. And those guys are rough over there. You know, if you go to airborne school and pretty much airborne ranger, all that stuff goes on over there. SFAS, all that stuff. And for them not to have the shark attack in the 80s, in the prime of when things were going on, as in recruits, the type of recruits we were getting, it's kind of weird, kind of baffled me. Another thing that I did see is that they used this old school like air gun for the immunizations. And the bad thing about that is that it's dangerous because it can cause infection, right? Because they're just going back to back on each one, and they could potentially get like air in your arm, right? Because they were doing their immunizations in the arm. So that was kind of like surprising that in the 80s they were using that type of gun. But yeah, they would just, it's like cattle, you know, like an assembly line. They just walk through and you just see the medic just popping them, popping them, and popping them. So that was surprising to see that they're using that, to say the least. Their DFAC also had cheeseburgers, hot dogs, fries, and ice cream. So they substituted the cake for ice cream over there in Fort Benning. And like I said, unheard of. They also showed that they did their 10, 12, and 15-mile ruck marches, which is the same as what we had to do. We started off with a 3-mile, and then it progressed to 6, 8, 10. So, and that was, and those were also markers that we had to check. Those are blocks that we had to check in order to pass basic training, obviously. They also had access kind of like to a rec center, and I can kind of see this in a way. Like, they play basketball, they also had pool, they played football for like PT and stuff like that. But what I can't see is like they had access to a gym. Like when you have Fort Benning, right, those guys are pumping out vicious, aggressive soldiers, and they have to be in shape. So I can see the access to the gym kind of thing going on, but it still was not a thing when I was in basic training. We didn't see a gym until AIT, and it wasn't really a gym itself. Is that in our formation area, they had a weight set for those who scored 270 and above on their PT test back in the day when it was push-up, sit-up, 2-mile run. So if you got 90 in each event, you were able to work out on your own. So it wasn't many. It was, I would say, 15 max of us, of like freaking, I don't know how many. So yeah, they had that over there. Another thing they did, they had the nuclear reaction training. So they would all be in mop gear and with their mask on, and then they teach them how to like what to do if they got a nuclear attack. You know, like everyone hits the deck, and hopefully it doesn't get you, but it will, because that thing is gonna just pulverize everything in its sight. And I think the most comical one was the CS gas. It was because it was out in the open, and they had more CS gas than I think they needed. I mean, they were super ignorant when it came to the CS gas operation. We also did the gas chamber, but we did it in a small like building or something like that. It was like a 2-room building. And in the beginning, in the first side, they would line us up, and of course we're in mop gear with everything on, and it's like 30 of us in a room that you're supposed to comfortably fit maybe 15, and they make us do all sorts of exercises to kind of get us sweaty, because when you get sweaty, the CS gas burns more, so your neck and whatever's exposed was just getting burnt. So that was kind of funny. Yeah, and then another thing, once we cross into the next room where they were actually, you can see them cooking the CS gas. It was so funny. Now it wasn't funny at the time, but yeah, you can see them cooking the CS gas, kind of like it's all the steam is coming out, and then you have to demask, and they make you say the soldier's creed. That way you have to breathe. So I mean, some people didn't get past "I'm an American soldier" before they're already dying, and I was probably one of those. And then they hold you in there for a little bit, just long enough for when you open that door, you're spitting out snot rockets everywhere. Like you cannot breathe. Like you're loving the fact that the door's open and you can go. But yeah, they did have that, but theirs was out in the open. And ours was, I mean, as I guess as time progressed, they were like, you know what, this we can have an actual gas chamber versus having it out in the open and control it more. But yeah, that was mainly everything that I saw in Fort Benning. They also had phone calls. They got church. They did PT as well. They didn't show them doing PT in regular uniforms. They were always in PT uniforms. They also, I didn't see none of the drill sergeants like one on one talking or anything like that. Another thing is that they didn't yell that much over there either. They were more they were assertive. Don't get me wrong, but there was no yelling going on. All right, so let's move into present day, which takes place in Fort Benning, Georgia. This is the 100 yards of boot camp, like the first day. And I got this. I read the article, and there's also kind of like I think an 11-minute video, 12-minute video on insider.com, which shows how basic training has evolved from the I'm in your rah rah in your face, shark attack, and all that cool stuff. Like I guess you would call it the unofficial tradition of the shark attack. But now they're moving into more of we're still going to get our point across, but it's not going to be as demeaning, if you will. So with that, what I noticed there in the boot in the first 100 yards of boot camp is the drill sergeants were still very assertive. Like, don't get me wrong, they weren't crazy, like up in your face most of the time, but they were very assertive. They kept the mental and physical stress up. A couple of times they did curse, but they would make sure that the soldiers were always like kept in check, like, hey, make sure you guys maintain your bearings. Like anytime they win one of the competitions, because there's 4 competitions. I'll talk about that in a second. But anytime they won a competition, you see, and the drill sergeants would let them kind of like celebrate, but they would immediately get them back to where they needed to be, like maintaining their bearing type thing. But yeah, the 100 yards of boot camp, day 1, it starts off with it's a 4. It starts off with a competition. It's a 4-event competition, right? And it's meant to instill teamwork, which in the Army, that's what there's 2 main things. There are many main things, but 2 of them are going to be leadership, creating leaders, and instilling teamwork. So, and when you instill teamwork, you are showing them that winning matters. So when you have that mentality that winning matters, then you'll go that extra mile. Many times if this isn't even just in the Army, you just run across an individual that you talk to and they say they don't do as good. They'll hit you with I really don't care. No, that's not the mentality over there in Fort Benning. It's winning matters, teamwork, and leadership. So the 4 events are, they have a resupply mission, build a bunker, resupply the bunker, and then a medical evacuation. I love that one. So the first thing that they're going to do is, for the resupply mission, they take all the troops, and this is all in an open area. Of course, it's some wooded area, stuff like that they have to navigate through in order to accomplish the mission. But it's basically an open field, right? A training area. So the first thing that they're going to do is they take the troops over there to a pallet, and they have them look at the pallet for like, I don't know, 30 seconds, I think it was. And that's going to come into play later. But they have them look at it, so everyone looks at it. So obviously, the drill sergeant says, all right, come on, let's go. So they have to carry all those items through the obstacle. They have to navigate it, and they have to beat the other platoon. So the first platoon to make it there, that's the first part of the win. Then the second part, the soldiers are tested on a study guide that they were given in the beginning, or maybe sometime like a couple days before, while they were in like in processing or something. They didn't really give a timeline for that, but they have a study guide, and then they test it. So every platoon gets a clipboard, and then they get like the first question, and they'll ask it, and then they'll get like, I don't know, a minute to answer, and then they have to give it up. So depending on those 2 factors, the team with the best score wins, or the platoon, right? So from what I remember, it was 4 platoons, and they're color coded. They were like red, blue, green, and I think yellow. So whoever wins, they don't have to get smoked. So the losers get some type of exercise. So whether it be the push up, the Y squat, the whichever exercise they're designated to do, they have to do a certain amount of reps. Boom, right? Because winning matters. No one wants to lose, and definitely no one wants to be doing no PT or anything like that, right? No one wants to do push-ups or get smoked. So that was the first one. Then they move into the next one, which is the build a bunker. So soldiers are given like the dimensions of the bunker, and then they have to recreate that. And they're recreating it obviously with sandbags. So they're going from one edge or one side to another, carrying all the sandbags, and then they have to build them accordingly to what the dimensions are. So if they say 5 long, 5 high, 5 sandbags high, then that's what they have to do. And it has to, whichever platoon does it the best and to the parameters in which they say, wins. And the other ones get smoked, right? Same thing with resupply the bunker. And this is where the resupply mission, the 30 seconds come into play. So with the 30 seconds coming into play, right? So they have to navigate. They have to take all the equipment that they took to the bunker, which they built around. Now they have to put it on a pallet the same way they saw it. And this was interesting because the platoon that did win, they had a strategy. You can tell that 2 troops were in charge of remembering like where the MREs were, because the pallet, I apologize, I didn't tell you what the pallet had. The pallet had MRE boxes, water jugs. They had a couple of litters and a few sandbags. So you can see that the platoon that won, they had a couple of troops remember one, like the way the water jugs were. The other guys remembered how the litters were. The other guys remembered how the MRE boxes were and how many they were stacked high. So everyone played a role, which is, if I were a drill sergeant, I would have been so proud of them, because the fact that this is a whole platoon that's never met each other, and they probably have a couple days under their belt, and they're formed up into that platoon. And yes, you can see that you did have some of the troops that were actually leading, like, hey, you do this, do that, but they all played their part, and that was awesome. So that was the third one. And then the last one was the medical evacuation. And with the medical evacuation, it was the same thing. It goes from one end to another, and it's a 6-man carry or a 4-man carry, total of 6. And they could only carry 6 sandbags at a time. And each set of 6 sandbags represents a casualty. So they run from one side to another, and it's funny because a lot of them just ate dirt, because some are faster than others, some are tired. Like, this is an all-day event, and they're getting smoked. So, and I think a lot of these, from when they were recording it, a lot of them had masks on, right? So, because I remember this, it took place in like 2020 until now. So take all that into account, it gets a little, like, they get tired. So they were eating a lot of dirt, let's just say that. And then they must get every sandbag to the other side neatly and to the dimensions that they're specified, and the team that has it correct wins. So overall, the team with the platoon with the most wins, they get to eat first every meal for 3 days, for 72 hours. And on top of that, they're not part of the cleanup crew, because, like I said, they're in an open training area in which they had a lot of equipment and training aids in which they used. So obviously the drill sergeants aren't going to do all that cleaning when they got all that muscle. So the winner got 3 days of eating all 3 meals first, and they didn't have to come out. So that's kind of an incentive, because, again, winning matters. So I found it interesting. When we went, we didn't have none of that stuff. So yeah, at the end of the day, like, I I don't think there are many big changes about basic training other than the fact that it went from smoking individuals to being able to kind of smoke individuals and still get their point across, because at the end of the day, in the 80s they said they were shark attacks. I saw none. When I went in 2007, there were definitely shark attacks, so I can only imagine that there were some shark attacks going on within that 5 to 10 plus or minus spanned 2002 to 2012. And now they are going from shark attacks and being in your face, rah, rah, to we're going to be stern. We're going to make this, we're still going to smoke you, but we're going to make it a competitive way. So kind of like messing with their psyche. Like, you're going to get smoked, but it's going to be a more constructed way, you know? So I don't think there's been many basic trainings. I think what they're trying to just do is like bridge the gap between like the new generation's way of communication versus our old one. Because to be honest with you, when I came in, I didn't care. Like, if they smoked me, it is what it is. Like, even now, 15 years later, I have a first sergeant in which I make sure I mess with him every day just so he can freaking yell at me, you know, just because I'm used to it. That's the way I operate. Some troops don't operate that way. But if we really think about it, because it's always, people are always kind of like voicing opinions on how this new generation is soft. But think about it, we're the parents of this new generation, right? So they're technically a product of us. We were the ones that were creating these very values, beliefs, and mentality that we're complaining about. So let's just, please, let's take some accountability in this, right? But yeah, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. That's it for today's episode of the Rogersarnt podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review the podcast. You can also like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram at Roger_Sarnt. You can friend me on Facebook at rogersarnt. And lastly, you can follow me on TikTok at rogersarnt. If you have any suggestions for the show, you can email me at rogersarnt@gmail.com. Until then, this is Sarnt Cruz signing off the net. And don't forget, you don't have to embrace the suck if you got the right tools in your ruck.
Rogersarnt!
Gmail.com. Until then, this is Sarnt Cruz signing off the net. And don't forget, you don't have to embrace the suck if you got the right tools in your ruck.
Rogersarnt!